So the pattern series really grew out of the modern camouflage series. But instead of taking an animal subject and pitting it against an abstract pattern, the idea was to take the silhouette of the animal, turn it into almost a stamp-like pattern, and pit the animal subject against a repeated image of itself. And I was inspired in large part by the American pop art movement, artists like Andy Warhol with his famous soup cans, or Wayne Thiebaud, who painted these very regimented row upon row upon row of puddings and desserts. Artists that were really focused on taking elements of sort of consumable pop culture and exploring these as subjects for art. What intrigued me as someone who loves animals and wildlife but wants to portray them in art, not just as isolated things that exist out in nature, but as creatures that we share our planet with and interact with on a daily basis, I thought this concept was a great opportunity to champion some of the animals that have a huge role in the world economy, jobs, food supply. So this repeated pattern becomes sort of symbolic of mass production and consumption, but again with sort of a whimsical tone to it. So I've always loved pigs. I don't know if this was a thing in the UK, but in the US there was a craze in the 1980s where miniature potbelly pigs first became available on the pet trade. And at the time I desperately wanted a pig. I never had one because my parents were sane. But I've loved pigs ever since and always found them to be really exciting subjects to paint. They're very animated, they're very interesting to watch, and I really fell in love with this large black sow on a visit to Cotswold Farm Park. She had a whole slew of piglets that were running around being adorable, so naturally I had to paint them as well. And it's worth noting that Cotswold Farm Park exists largely to promote and preserve England's heritage livestock breeds. And again, in keeping with this notion of sort of the consumer culture as it relates to wildlife, both in agriculture and in animal husbandry, our desire for bigger, better, and cheaper has led increasingly to monoculture. So more and more ancient and antique and wonderful varieties of seeds and produce, but also livestock are rapidly disappearing in favor of what's cheapest and easiest. So doing a series of paintings that highlight livestock and the importance of livestock became really important to me. So I've spent quite a lot of time in rural and agricultural areas of England, very little time actually in the cities, and I really can't think of any image that communicates how much I love England more than these beautiful expanses of endless green dotted with white sheep. So this notion of white on green, which is incidentally the title of this painting, really became something that I wanted to explore in a painting. And sheep are great subjects too. I don't have quite the history with them that I have with pigs, but they're wonderfully charismatic, they're very interesting to watch, they have great attitudes. And I'm far more likely to paint an animal subject that I think has an interesting attitude than one that's simply pretty. That's really more of what animates me as an artist, is portraying attitude. So my Silky Chicken painting is called Marco Polo because, interestingly, Marco Polo during his travels actually came back from Asia writing about these interesting chickens with fur. He could have been talking about nothing but silkies. And as much as I'm interested in exotic and unusual animals, one of the things that most excites me is animals that we think we know well, but unusual versions of them. Dogs and cats that are hairless, horses that are especially large or especially small, and in this particular case, chickens that have this very unusual feather texture that really does look almost like fur.